Happy Thursday. Welcome to Thursday Thoughts with that EdLaw Lady. I am Nkoyo, your host, speaker, thinker, whatever you want to call it, on this journey. Today we are having a COVID chat. As you know, I am all about education and running both great schools that ensure that every child has the ability to meet his or her limitless potential, and also running great business to make sure that we are preparing the future for a life that they will encounter. And so right now, all of this, I'm going to use an F word, palava, all of this like mess, craziness that's going on right now related to education and schools opening in the fall, brought me to just have a very different sort of conversation today. So if you are here live, let me know. And if you're watching the replay, definitely reach out to me. You can follow me always online at the F Young Firm, as well as at that EdLaw Lady. Again, that's at that EdLaw Lady. I think that F Young Firm is on the actual live, so you should see it there. But anyway, so today we are going to have a conversation about schools reopening and whether you, as a parent, should send your child back and in which capacity, virtual, face-to-face, what other options are there. And I'm doing this today specifically because I am in Georgia, and I know that a number of school districts have asked parents to make that decision, some as early as tomorrow, and others coming up in this month. So you are being forced to decide something that is almost insane to have to be deciding at this point. So I just want to make sure that I say that, call that out, name that there's so much uncertainty in Georgia. Our numbers are going up as they are in many other states across the country in terms of new COVID-19 patients, people being hospitalized, etc. So however people want to politicize this issue, the reality is that people have died. People will continue to die, unfortunately. And the scientists, including the CDC and others, have let out certain guidelines for us to think about as we are reopening. I want to say again, I'm speaking as that EdLaw Lady today, so I'm not necessarily speaking as the firm. And I also always want to give my disclaimer, like while I am an attorney, I'm not providing any type of legal advice. I just want to help you be apprised of what your options are and the things that you maybe should start thinking about if you are a parent like myself, confronted with this issue about whether you're going to send your kids to school in the fall. This is an issue that's like deeply passionate, like relevant, I should say, to me, because I have two kids, one who is 17 and who desperately wants to go back to school in the fall face-to-face, wants a sense of normalcy, wants to be able to see his friends, wants what would be a typical high school or, as close to a typical high school experience as he can get. And I also have a 17-month-old who has never been to school, never been to daycare yet. Poor kid's been stuck with me since birth. And we're, at the point where he's learning so much, and we know that children learn so much more from other kids. And so there's a whole lot of angst that I personally feel as a parent around, like, should I put him in daycare? If I do, what are those choices and what does that look like? And I think that the question and the issues are just so different depending on where your child falls in the K through 12 or even the pre-K through 12 spectrum. And then I think that there's also like really strong issues related to race and class and ability that are not necessarily being considered in this conversation around schools reopening, and whether school leaders, teachers, etc., have the ability to themselves be safe and feel secure in their job. Let me call out, like, no one has offered them hazard pay for putting their lives potentially at risk and danger by going into what could be a super spreading type of environment. So first, like, back up off the teachers, like they're real people just like everybody else. I understand that the administration has said a whole lot about how kids, like they're fine. They're like highly unlikely to catch this or to pass away from it. But kids don't go to school by themselves. I'm not sure why that's something that's confusing for the powers that be, but like there are lots of different people and risk levels in the school building. I was just sharing when I taught in Fulton County, 4th grade, over a decade ago, a lot of our cafeteria staff were more elderly women in particular who may fall into a higher risk category. Same with our bus drivers, same with the custodians, etc. So there are a lot of people in the school setting who have different issues, different concerns, different levels of risk as it relates to the coronavirus. So I wanted to just create space for us to have a conversation around, WTF do I do about the fall, especially because some schools are requiring you to make this decision now, and it's your decision for the entire semester, which if anyone's listening on anybody's school board, I don't think that that's entirely fair. And I also want to call out the irony of some of these board members making these requests of parents while they are holding their board meetings virtually, so also not in person. So I feel like if you at the district level are not feeling comfortable enough to sit in the room practicing these social distancing practices that you're saying you are able to do in the school setting, you shouldn't be asking parents to do that with their children, with the people who are more vulnerable, who don't get to have a say entirely in terms of this process. So I just want to also call out the irony and utter foolishness that signaling is that you're providing. So let's say you're here and you're having to make this decision. What are some things that you should be thinking about? So I know a number of districts have laid out different types of plans. The CDC has provided some guidelines. I was actually on a panel yesterday, and one of the women was saying that she takes her safe space with her, so she's going to be transparent wherever she is. So I'm stealing that, I'm borrowing that, and I'm using that. I'm going to bring my safe space with me. And what I'm going to say, and this will be helpful for you to determine whether I am a credible voice for you to listen to. But I feel like when the CDC released its guidelines for opening the schools, they were signaling to us that it's probably not safe to open schools. And all of the requirements that are in there are great. If you've never been in a school, it may be easy to lay that out. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I actually went into education personally is because I was like, I want to run for politics. I want to do all these different things. And education's going to be my platform. And I had a very good friend who sat me down and said, a lot of people go into politics or positions of power and have never been in a school since they actually attended. And so they have no idea what's really going on in that school. And I really feel like sometimes the decisions that come out from the top down make it abundantly clear that the people who are making decisions around what's going on in the school have no idea what's really going on, what happens on a practical day-to-day basis. So I wish that they had consulted with more teachers to help build out these plans, to help vet these plans, to help have conversations around whether these plans are feasible. Because as a former fourth grade teacher teaching kids who were like 9, 10 years old, I'm not sure that it's possible to do all the things that are on there. As someone who coached teachers K through 12, so have seen the whole spectrum, we ask our kindergarten teachers, first grade teachers to do a lot, and they do amazing stuff in the classroom. And if you have a child of that age group, I'm sure it's a lot of energy and a lot of like corralling small minds, small beings, fidgety bodies into a space to do things. So I don't know how a number of these things are feasible at that age range as well. So it would have been really great for us to consult with teachers. And I encourage you, as you're making this decision, parents, and guardians, if you know any educators, to have a candid conversation with them about what they think is possible in the classroom setting, what you think is safe. So the guidelines are talking about social distancing. They're talking about wearing masks. There's a whole bevy of things there, having lunch in the classroom. God bless everyone who's going to have lunch in the classroom this upcoming year. I know we used to do that as a reward from time to time, but lunch in the classroom is something else. That's an experience. So there's a whole host of things that are there. If you're not familiar, I would encourage you to go and look at the CDC site to see what those guidelines are for children. So you can even look at that and your school's plan for reopening to see if they're aligning with that. Some schools are requiring kids to wear masks. I think APS is doing that and other school districts are not. For example, DeKalb, Gwinnett, most of the other ones, they have not come out and said that masks are required. and that those are optional. And so I think for those of you who feel like wearing a mask is a preventative measure that we should collectively be doing, you want to think about that as um, you're looking at weighing your options in terms of should I send my child back to school face to face. Again, if they're not required, then of course everybody gets to make their own decision about whether they wear them, whether they start the day with them, end the day with them, whatever. And so again, those are just like things you want to think about as you're assessing your risk or the risk for your child. I think the other thing that you want to be looking at is like, what is the social distancing plan? If your child rides the bus, what's the plan for on the bus? And in all the spaces, like how are we making sure that these places are being will be as safe as possible? And again, as someone who practices law, I will tell you that risk is something that we all just have to manage and live with. And so it's always about assessing your own personal risk tolerance and then figuring out the ways to minimize or mitigate that risk to the best of your ability. And so one of the challenges, I think, in the school setting, particularly in the public education setting, is that, again, it's open to all. Everyone has their set of rights. We've seen a lot of people saying, that they're not wearing a mask because that infringes upon their rights, et cetera. And so, again, if it's not mandated at the school level, then people who don't believe that this is a concerning issue or don't feel like it's much of a risk or don't believe that they should have to wear a mask or that their children have to wear a mask will be the same people in the classroom with your children. So you just want to sort of be assessing some of those issues. And so again, I think the first step is like looking at what the CDC guidelines have suggested and then assessing that along with your school's plan. So that's sort of on the risks, the sciencey side of that. I'm not going to debate facts and science with people. So whatever you choose to believe is what you are entitled to believe. So if you do believe that this is a concern and that there are some data points that you can look at, I would encourage you to look at those data points and assess whether the school's plan aligns with what you believe is a safe and effective plan. I know some school districts have been pushing the dates back, particularly here in Georgia. A couple of them have been pushing them back. I wish anybody would listen to me, but I feel like there's opportunity to actually push the school dates back, to actually think expansively about how we reopen, to be creative, to recognize that maybe what we need at the high school level is not the same thing that we need at the elementary school level. And we should maybe be thinking about categories of students as opposed to just like a brush K through 12, everybody open because it's public school. But I really feel like, we might need a different approach. And that leads me to my second thought about this. And it's really around where your child is in the academic journey. So like I said, we have in Georgia, at least in most school districts, we have elementary, middle school, and high school, or some people have sort of like a K through 8 and then a 9 through 12 for high school. So what are the options? Like where does your child fall in that process? And what do they need at that point in time? So as an educator, I fully understand and appreciate, and a parent myself, I mentioned earlier, even with my 17-month-old, like socialization and being able to learn around other students in person. Like there's a lot that is rich in that learning environment that we can't necessarily replicate in other environments unless, we figure out how to use technology in more nuanced ways and make technology available. But again, those are bigger questions, policy questions around where we think that education should be going, period. It's 21st century. We do a lot of stuff on our tech devices. So it's surprising that school districts are still as antiquated as they are, because they're literally supposed to be preparing children for the future that they will encounter, not the reality that we see right now, et cetera. So sidebar, because I don't want to get on any more of my soapboxes, but thinking about it, right? So I have a 17-year-old. He's in high school. Next step for him, hopefully, is college or a trade school. What's happening at the university level, right? Are there going to be face-to-face classes? Are kids doing things virtually online? Like, is that a place where maybe a virtual option for him at this point, if we can find ways to include socialization. So whether those classes are happening on Zoom or any other like education tech that's out there. And I just also want to call out, like, people have been having school virtually from before the coronavirus. So our school districts could maybe look at some of these other institutions that have used virtual technology and see what platforms they're actually using to simulate a classroom experience. And what we did in the spring was really crisis schooling. Like, it was like, we got to shut down. What do we do? Like, and we just do something. Like, they've actually had time to really think about this, and so there have been opportunities, whether they've been used or not, to really think about how we could provide a great educational experience without necessarily being face to face all the time. So, for high school students, I think, there's space to play, or to consider about, what are some of the life skills that they need to learn, right? The ability to take initiative, to be responsible, to work independently, etc. And so some of those bigger life skills that are necessary may be able to be bolstered by a virtual learning experience, which may emulate or simulate or, be similar to what they might experience at the university level. So there's opportunities there. But of course, there's nuance, right? So does every child in high school have access to technology? Like, can we close this digital divide that is very real, that is drawn definitely along lines of race and class? Like, how can we make a 21st century education available to everyone, right? So that's a bigger, broader question, which I was really pleased to see in some places, school districts figuring it out, creating public-private partnerships with telecommunication companies to get internet hotspots, et cetera, in certain communities, being innovative, figuring out how can they put a bus with a hotspot in it in certain parts of the neighborhood so that there could be free Wi-Fi available to that community, right? It's not a perfect plan. They weren't perfect. There were definitely faults, but it was a far greater step forward than what we've been doing in the past. So figuring out, where is my kid in the spectrum? Like, what might be beneficial for him or her moving forward. And again, I will say, I am not a proponent of all tech, all, everything online. I do think that there is a human component that we are losing, that we're seeing even with adults spending so much of our time on social media, etc. So I do think that there needs to be ways to create and build in social interaction, people be able to see each other's faces, so that they can see that when they say something hurtful, it is hurtful, and like actually have those reinforcers that we need to build a compassionate citizenry. So I say that with that caveat, but I think, starting virtual for maybe high school students, maybe even middle school students, doesn't foreclose the opportunity to actually have socialization opportunities for them when numbers are down, and maybe it's safer to actually do that. I think for elementary school, it's like really, really a difficult decision because, younger kids probably need a little bit more support. And so they're not necessarily as self-directed as we would hope that our kids would be at the high school level. So I feel like, where we could figure out if schools were offering things in person that could actually be safe, that might be a good option. If not, some cool things that I've been seeing from around the web that people are doing is actually creating their own sort of homeschooling co-ops, and finding like-minded parents who share similar beliefs about the risks, et cetera, and how we should be managing them, and having little homeschooling pods or groups like within their community to make learning accessible. I've seen some people talking about hiring teachers, retired teachers who maybe are not going to go back to their traditional job because of these concerns and are looking for other opportunities. And so hiring teachers or tutors to sort of manage the homeschooling process. I've heard definitely some people actually just hiring someone again to manage the homeschooling period just for their own children, not necessarily like as a co-op or something of that sort. So there are those options there. And I recognize that there's definitely a level of privilege that you would need to have there, that you are able to afford to sort of pay someone to either manage that process for you entirely, or, be able to be part of a co-op to have that happen. But I know that some people are thinking, I want my kid to have face-to-face experience. I'm not certain that it's safe in the school setting that has hundreds of kids. And so I'm trying to find smaller settings to make that available. And again, I'm always thinking about, how can we be innovative and creative? So for those of you who maybe are listening and thinking like, oh, I'm an educator. Is there an opportunity for me to be a tutor or something of that sort in this season in a way that allows me to provide income for my family as well as still continue to do what I love to do and be safe? So I just throw that out there without saying anything. Might be a time to think about whether you want to organize your work differently. But again, it's just, I sort of think like, one, does the CDC guidelines and the school's plan align? Is there enough alignment there for you to feel comfortable sending your child there? Adding the caveat, at least here in Georgia, like schools have sovereign and official immunity. So at the end of the day, like there is no one necessarily for you to go back to and say, you put my child in this unsafe situation and now they're ill or, whatever else down the line. So you really have to own this decision for yourself because there's only so much that they can do and will be responsible for having done at the end of the day. So that's the piece. Like, is the safety plan safe enough for me? Second, like, will my child be able to get some of the larger, bigger life skills that they need at their age level and range? Like, is online something that is accessible for them and valuable? I think the other thing that I would say too, because I am a parent of a child with special needs and I work with a lot of parents who have those children, you're still entitled to FAPE. You're still entitled to your IEP. So school districts still have to do their part in terms of what you have signed up to do. So what I will say is in the homeschooling scenario, if you choose to homeschool, school districts have options in terms of like the type of service that they provide to homeschooling families. They may say that if you want to access FAPE, that you need to be in the school setting. And so there is some back and forth there. And if you have specific questions about that, I'm more than happy to get on a consultation with you because that kind of moves more into the legal advice. And so I don't want to do that in this setting. But I would say also that if your school district is doing virtual for any age group, and that's just what they're doing. I've heard some districts across the country are starting certain people virtual only, and then they'll make that determination if they're going to go face-to-face later. Please know that you still have rights under your IEP. There's not just a general sort of suspension of that for COVID, so make sure that the services that your child is entitled to, that you agreed to as part of his or her FAPE, are being provided, albeit virtually or in whatever capacity needs to be done to ensure that they're still getting that. And if you need to have a virtual IEP meeting, which is something that districts have been doing since the pandemic started and have been figuring out better technology to do it better, you are fully entitled to have that. I always want to remind parents that you can call an IEP meeting at any time as long as it's reasonable. And so please don't feel like you have to wait until your annual review to have a conversation about that. That is not the case at all. So again, looking at like, where's my child? What are the options? What would be best for their learning and their socio-emotional development? And then I think the third thing and then again, also what other options? How can I think about this creatively? Do I have the ability, if you're working from home, to allow your children to still be at home with maybe somebody else monitoring that education process? If that's not a possibility, for all of our parents who are essential workers or have to work outside of the home, like, again, going back to that school plan, is this plan really set up to ensure that my child can be safe and protected in this setting? And advocating, right? Call the school board, call your school board members, send letters to the state. And again, the state will send things down to the local level. Most of our education decisions are made at the local level. So really, like, reach out to your school board members. I know they are getting an earful. Make sure that you're heard. I know some school districts have sent out surveys. If you haven't filled out your survey, fill it out. If you've missed the deadline for it, call, send a letter, send emails, whatever you need to do to make sure that you're voice is heard and your concerns are shared so that they are considering that as they are moving forward with these plans. So I think that the third thing is just definitely being an advocate for your child in this season, because again, children, to some extent, they don't necessarily know the risks themselves, and so they can't adequately protect themselves against it. We as parents have to make sure that we are doing that. So, oh gosh, I've already been on here for like 25 minutes. I'm yapping away. Those are my general thoughts about going back to school, whether you should go online, in person, or other. And again, I think you really got to figure out what your child needs, what you're most comfortable with, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to answer to yourself around that decision. Look at the school plans, the CDC guidelines, make sure there's alignment, reach out to your school board, figure out, what options are possibly there. If you are going to be going in a face-to-face setting, again, how are they making sure and managing the risks in that setting? How can you supplement? How can you figure out ways to create socialization opportunities for your children if they are going to be virtual? I think those are some of the things to just be thinking about. I know those are the things that I'm thinking about. I'm definitely concerned if I'm going to be going back to or putting my youngest in daycare. What's the class size? What's the teacher to student ratio? How clean is the environment? How often are they cleaning? I think even at the broader level for our school districts, public education, right, they have been told to cut their budgets, and then they also need to have all these additional safety measures that are going to cost money. Like, I don't, unless the White House is planning to just like make that available to school districts at no cost, great. It still costs money, so that money is coming from somewhere, our tax dollars, because that's actually how the government runs. So we just want to make sure that they have the capacity to do the things that they need to do also. And then I think the last little piece that I want to throw out there is that we are all experiencing a rather traumatic experience right now. There is some trauma associated with this. And so I think also looking at whether schools are providing their educators with trauma-informed resources, socio-emotional learning resources, because our kids are not going to just show up and be able to learn in the same way that they were able to do before. Like, we're all experiencing a lot of uncertainty, fear, worry, etc. They feel that too, even if they can't communicate it. And so as best you can, I really feel like it's also important to have these conversations with your children to make sure you're keeping track of how they're feeling in this season, like what their concerns are, what they're thinking about, because those things will impact their ability to learn and learn effectively. So while I know a lot of people are saying like face-to-face is the best way to learn, etc., if our children are not emotionally prepared to learn because of everything that's going on, from COVID-19 to the racial unrest that's going on, and just there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of stress. I think a lot of people maybe haven't even identified that they're stressed, and that their reactions to things maybe are not as measured as they would be if they were not under this heightened sense of stress. But our children feel that, they perceive that, even if they can't name it, they don't understand where it's coming from. So I think the other thing that's really important as you're making this decision and going through this process is to check in with your children, check in with them often to see how they're feeling about going back to school, what they understand about the challenges here, because even in settings where kids are going to be mandated to wear masks, or if you want them to wear masks, it may be a lot for them to wear a mask for however many hours they're at school. So we need to have constant conversations with them about why it's important and how to manage through what can be uncomfortable about that. So those are my general thoughts about this. If you have additional questions, you want to talk more, you want me to talk on a specific topic related to COVID and schools reopening, please feel free to follow me, like the page here. Follow me. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me if you look my name up. I'm in a lot of different places. You can also join my email list. I have a free download for those of you who join. It is a parent advocacy sort of tip sheet, like things parents should think about as they're advocating for their children. So you can get that by texting EdLaw to 33777. And again, that's EdLaw, EDLAW, to 33777. All right, well, that's all I've got for you this Thursday. I think I've chatted and yapped enough. I hope that you have a great weekend, that you stay safe, that you find places to find your own inner peace. Meditate, turn off the TV, turn off the social media, all the news, and just give yourself some quiet time to digest all that's going on. All right, wishing the best for you and your loved ones. Have a great Thursday.